The racial achievement gap in Madison, how did it start? Why is it persistent? And what can be done about it? Good morning, Rob Starbuck filling in for Neil Heinen. The last couple of years may be remembered as not only one of the most interesting times politically in Madison, but also when we began to take seriously closing the academic achievement gap. In 2010, just 48% of African American students graduated from high school on time. That's compared to 87% of white students. And just a week ago, the Madison School District unveiled a plan to close the gap. And later this week, the subject is the topic of an educational forum here in Madison. Joining us today to talk about the forum and the history of Madison's achievement gap, Kaleem Kher, CEO, Urban League of Greater Madison, Milele Chikasa Anana, publisher of Umoja. This is the latest issue, the February issue. Maybe you want to pick it up. Researcher Stephen Perez, and Darrell Connor of WIBA Outreach. So let's start with, how did we get here? And I think that may be a good question for the researcher, because this is an area that you have studied, Stephen.
Yeah. In terms of what is happening in Madison right now, there is several social factors at work. People often blame poverty and parental disengagement as the reason we're here, but I think we feel differently. When you look at what is causing the achievement gap, what I think it comes down to is a lack of opportunity and the real true understanding of how to educate students of color.
And this just didn't happen, this achievement gap just didn't happen yesterday. I mean, when did in our history in this country, when did we start seeing it in the education system? When
you examine the term achievement gap, that is a term that has recently come about since about the mid-1980s. Before that, there wasn't a lot of use and inclusion of data, but the traditional practice within communities of color people would go to school till 6th or 7th grade. So the secondary opportunity wasn't even available to people of color.
Now I just learned something, because I'm thinking, I guess that traditional way, thinking that, okay, it's economics and it's parents that's kind of behind this whole thing. But apparently it's a much wider scope.
It's a bigger issue. We have been addressing the issue of achievement. As Stephen said, the gap, we didn't really start talking about gap until the 80s, but we've been addressing achievement issues since the 60s in Madison. We've always sort of, when you read the history that Stephen's put together, it's interesting that our community first reacts and says, well, we really don't have a problem. And then when we really figure out that we do have a problem, it's okay, we want to solve the problem, but we don't want to feel like we're culpable in the problem. And so we have these fits and starts and stops, and we don't get any real traction. And so the history that he's put together has shown that there have been periods, like every 10 years, where this issue has come up, but we've not sustained any real progress to address it.
Lily, you had an interesting quote. I was looking at one of your issues, and you talk about, forget about the past. You got to step forward. We know what the past is. We know that there is a gap. Now it's time to move forward. And it sounds like what may have worked in the past, which you kind of say, forget about, it needs a new thinking to take care of this.
Well, I think that's true. I think we're at the crossroads now where we have to propel ourselves into the future. And I do agree with Stephen, who says that it's not parents, because it's the parents who ask for the Madison Prep School, for example. It's parents who have been for the past, 50 years since I've been in Madison, have brought this issue before the school board. And I think that it is a lack of will and a lack of leadership. None of the superintendents since I have been here have addressed this issue. Art Ritchie didn't address it. After him came, I forget the name right now.
Was it Art Rainwater?
No, it was Hafman. Dan Hafman, Cheryl Wilhort.
Travis in there.
Travis. Nobody has been willing to address this issue, although parents have and the community have been pushing with every administration. John Odom presented for about 2 years a set of statistical data that projected what would happen if the school system continued the achievement gap. So speaking to the future, I think it's time for the school board to take a look at the culture, one, and two, the expectations, and to begin to make radical changes in the way they treat children. Now, what they're doing is blaming it on the children. They're poor. Well, we've always educated poor children in this country. And then they blame it on the parents. Well, the parents haven't been disengaged. The parents are constantly engaged. Then they blame it on the zip code. Then they blame it on the lack of money. Money will not solve this problem. Only a will to change the thinking that the school system is for privileged people and for superior people and people who look like, not like me.
Do you agree with that?
I do. And I'll say this. One of the things that, we talked about this before we came on, and one of the things I've seen is the fact that what you have today is you have kids that are completely disengaged from school. They don't buy in to the system, to the teachers, to the school, none of it. And it used to be, there was a time where kids would go out, would come to school to congregate and meet their friends, even if they weren't really engaged with what was going on in school, and they would go out for sports. They're not even doing that today. Malele is exactly right. We could spend $1 billion if we're not willing to change the system from within, and I'm talking about from administration to the school district in general. If you're not willing to completely change the way that you teach kids, reach kids, and make parents an equal partner in education, it doesn't matter how much you spend. Without that component, you're going to be back to the same levels we are. Even if you approve this plan and you take it out 5 to 7 years, we'll still be here talking about the achievement gap.
Let me say this, that the consequences of this achievement gap, although they have been evolving slowly, are very severe. They're severe for the white community, because if the school system isn't teaching my child, they are not going to teach your child for the 21st century. It's severe for the business industry, because the school system isn't producing a workforce that can keep us a healthy economy. And it's severe for the state. So it's severe for everybody. If we don't, it is not just my problem because I'm black or my grandchildren are black or your child is in the school. It has severe consequences, economic consequences down the road, and that down the road is within 5 years.
Let's take a quick break. I want to follow up on a thought. We'll be right back with you. Welcome back to For the Record, talking about the achievement gap in Madison and Malele. You made a very good point that this is a whole social issue. This is just not one or two races. This is everybody should be involved in this, because if they're not educating your kids, they're not going to educate my kids as well. That's your point.
Right.
And that's where it seems like it's going to take more than the school system to do it. Maybe should business get involved and all as well?
Business is a stakeholder in that, and this, as well as parents, community organizations, and Dane County is at stake, because people aren't going to be willing to move here or to grow their kids here if we don't have a good education system. There are two things in this country that make a difference: education and housing. And both of those are in crises now in the country, but education particularly here. But this is an ongoing problem, I want to emphasize, and it's an economic problem too.
It appears, Stephen, that more young men and boys are being left behind. There are more girls seem to be doing much better in school and getting an education.
When you say much better, I think that needs clarification, much better compared to whom. If you have a group of African American women or girls in high school, they are doing better than African American boys. But are they doing as well as students that aren't African American? No, they're not. There's only an incremental increase of girls that are graduating successfully than the boys. When you look at suspension and expulsion rates of both African American boys and African American girls, they are much higher and disproportionate to the number of students that are white that are being suspended or expelled.
How does, when you look at this district and this issue, how does Madison compare to other parts of the country? Have you looked at that?
Yeah, we have one of the largest gaps in the nation for a city our size. We have the largest gap in the nation with regard to graduation performance for black students, and very close to the largest for Latino students too, in the nation for a state. Our achievement gap on our test scores is the largest in the nation. Our incarceration rate among African American males is the largest in the nation here in Dane County for a county our size. So you have, 47% of all black males between ages of 25 to 29 are incarcerated on probation under some form of court supervision in Dane County. And so it's astounding. And so when you look at those indicators, it requires radical change. It requires that we do something markedly different. But the competing forces of culture have held us back, where, there's not a common understanding of what drives that. And there's not a common understanding because a lot of times those of us who are in positions of authority, of which African Americans are few, don't truly understand the nature of the problem or how it plays out every day. And so they think through a textbook or some speech or some article that they read that we might be able to address it differently, when we need a cultural approach. We need to change the way schools address families. And we truly believe that if you go back to old school African American values and how our schools were organized after slavery and during the era of battle for civil rights, the schools served the entire family, not just the kids.
This is one of those issues that, at least from my perspective, being in the news business, we hear a lot of the adults talking about this. And I'm sure you talk to young people. What have they told you, Daryl? Here, I'm trying as hard as I can, and it's just not working. How do you encourage a kid to continue on?
Yeah, and that's the toughest thing. I had the chance to visit the juvenile detention center school last week to talk to last Friday, in fact, to talk to a group of kids. And one of the things that they talked about was the expectations for them to succeed in the classroom, that they felt like they weren't considered smart until they proved otherwise. And that was an attitude that kind of permeated throughout the group that I was speaking to. It is everyone on this panel said it absolutely correctly. It is a system problem, and it's a problem that we need to address. And I want people out there who aren't African American, who aren't Latino, to think about this one important question. Take yourself and stand outside of yourself and put yourself in someone else's shoes and think about, what if there was a 48% graduation rate for white students in this community? What would be the conversation we would be having today if that were the case? What would be the reaction to folks in this community and to the school district if that were the case? And I think that what we found here is that people have a tendency to make sure that their needs are met, and in this case adults, rather than what's the most important thing. And that is, these are the kids that are on the wrong end of the achievement gap. That seems to be lost in this conversation. And we have to get back to, how do we get these kids re-engaged and on track? Because Malele is absolutely right. We all lose in this community if we don't address this issue. White kids lose because when you look at the statistics, even though it's 87%, that needle hasn't moved that much in the Madison Metropolitan School District in the last 20 years. It's not like you're seeing this exponential increase in white student achievement. It's stayed the same. It's become stagnant too. So this is everybody's problem, and people really need to step outside themselves and think about, what if it was them? What if it were them? What would we be talking about today? How would we be addressing this?
Stephen, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just want to piggyback on what Darrell has said, to say if this were a business and your product had an 87% efficiency coming off the line, somebody would be fired and they'd have some replacement workers. If the product coming off your line had a 47% failure rate, the company would turn around, the shareholders would, be upset, and the president and the CEO would do something different. So our product is our kids. We cannot afford an 87% graduation rate when we need 100% graduation rate, or closer to 100. We cannot afford a 47% failure in our product. It's as simple as that.
Stephen, let me just going back to Darrell's point. This, I guess you call it an unconscious bias. Is this just going to get worse? That kids of color just gonna have to, he's gonna have to prove himself. He or she gonna have to prove himself first because they're gonna underachieve. Yeah, so is that just gonna perpetuate?
When you look at some of the comments made by people in positions of leadership within the district, there is an open acknowledgement of institutionalized racism and lower expectations. Cheryl Wilhoit in 1994 she comments on that. In this system exists a bunch of institutionalized racism, and she readily acknowledged the lower expectations for students of color. When you talk to students of color that are in the schools right now, every person that I've talked to can give you one example, at least one time. Oh yeah, the teacher said this to me, and you're appalled.
And it's funny that teachers get frustrated when they hear that. There might be teachers listening to this now who get angry in hearing that. But if they really look at who their colleagues are, they understand that does exist in the school system. If you have 2,600 teachers, you can't say to me that every last one of them doesn't harbor some low expectations, because we know that there are those that do. And so we think that there has to be a solution to hire teachers who don't feel that way, to support teachers who need a cultural lens correction, but also for those teachers who just can't get it right. Do we really need them teaching our students? And so we have to have a deeper conversation across the board about parents, about teachers, about principals, about kids, and that's not a conversation we're having right now.
We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about Madison Prep and also the school district's plan to bridge the achievement gap. We'll be right back. We want to let you know about an opportunity that's coming up later in the week, the Educational Opportunity Forum. That will be discussing this issue going on at the CUNA Mutual Conference Center over on the west side off Mineral Point Road, Thursday, 6 until 8 p.m. And as we've heard today, parents in this school district are invested in this, and it'll probably be a good thing to go to. We've heard your proposal, Madison Prep. We've heard Daniel Nerad's proposal for the school district. Where does Madison Prep stand right now?
We're going to still push for it to get approved. We think that we feel strongly that it addresses the issues that we've talked about here. The Madison School District, people will say we aren't the parents. Well, at Madison Prep, we are. We behave that way. So what the fundamental changes we're trying to promote for the school system exist within the context of Madison Prep. So we think it's a learning opportunity. But as we're now talking about broader systemic change, we need to look deeply at how can Madison School District restructure and reorient itself around the student body that it has, while at the same time attracting families back to Madison, so that we can't afford is for Madison to be an 80 to 90% poverty school system. If we have that, and you talk about declining real estate and everything else, the inability to fund education, we can't afford it. So we think that the plan that Dr. Nerad has put forward has to address the two needs. One is the needs of the achievement gap. We have to eliminate it, but we have to attract middle-class families back to Madison and provide the type of innovative schools that they need for their children as well.
I'm assuming that although the Superintendent Nero's plan just came out this week, have you gotten a chance to look at it?
I've had a chance to look at it and glance at it. I haven't gotten through the whole thing. It just goes back to what I said earlier, and that is You have to have a system-wide change within the school district in order to even to get to a point where you can even put forward a proposal such as this. That everything needs to change. The way you reach kids, the way you teach kids. But I want to make another point, and we talked about it in the last segment. You know, I love and respect teachers. And I've never engaged in teacher bashing. I know they have a thankless job. They can act as psychologists, psychiatrists, sometimes babysitter, social worker. I mean, it's a very interesting dynamic, and I have nothing but respect for them. But I think what people have to understand, and what teachers have to understand in this conversation, is they're not the victims here. The kids are the victims. And everybody needs to get off of this attitude that if you talk about some of the issues in the schools when it comes to kids who are falling behind, that somehow that's teacher bashing. Everybody needs to take a step back and understand what's at stake here, and understand that we all need each other in order for us to address this issue.
Is there any district in this country that you can point to or program that says that's it?
Montgomery County, Maryland.
Montgomery County, Maryland.
When I've heard people say, "Oh, well, there's everybody's struggling with this around the country." I've had the opportunity to be one of the reviewers for Obama's Race to the Top initiative, for the panel that advised the U.S. Secretary on the evaluation of No Child Left Behind. I've been able to see reform on a broad scale. And I can tell you that there are districts that are making progress. There are public schools that are making progress. My own children went to a public school in Bowie, Maryland, where there was no achievement gap in the middle of the elementary school. Black children outperformed white kids, and they were almost even in terms of numbers of students in the schools. And so we're not looking at what are they doing in those communities. We're just assuming here that, oh my God, these kids are so difficult to teach. And that's not true. So we think that if we did two things, if we found those teachers within our schools who are succeeding at educating students, and they are there, the district should be able to tell you, if you call and say, who are your best teachers in every building, they should be able to turn that around in 20 minutes. And then let's look outside the school system for the promising opportunities, and then figure out how do we manifest those things right here in Madison, Wisconsin. We do think Madison Prep could be one of those solutions, preferably as an instrumentality school, a part of the district, but we think we have to do much more than that. And one thing Dr. Neerat's plan does do is it allows us to look more broadly at the district, and for that I respect him.
Yeah.
Okay. With that, we will take one quick break and be right back to wrap things up. I want to thank our panel today. That'll do it for this edition of For the Record. We'll see you next week.